Mr. Loyd Chandler. He served in World War II and in the Korean War, and his unit was called up for duty either in the Berlin airlift, but he didn't have to serve during that.
No.
So I'll just start out by asking you, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was riding with my mother and father, going from Atlanta, Georgia to Newnan, Georgia, which was our hometown, and we heard over the radio that they attacked Pearl Harbor, and my father turned around right then and went back home.
Really?
And of course, I was the kid. I turned 17 in '44, and I was scared to death. I think the war would be over before I was in it. I guess that's pretty much the oftentimes. I went into the Navy in late '44, finished my boot camp at Great Lakes, and went aboard the USS Sangamon. Now, the USS Sangamon was a converted Standard Oil, or SO, tanker, OA 28 to be exact. And the Navy was converting anything they could get into a tanker. A strange story was that she actually converted two side paddle wheelers into carriers. And they served in can't think of
The Pacific
Great Lakes.
Oh, the Great
as,
Lakes.
Training vessels.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, Sangamon was classified first as, that was AVG 26. That was before the escort carriers was such. They tried to call them Jeep carriers, I think, but I don't think that stuck. The first mission was North Africa. She served in North Africa, carried a bunch of P-40s over there, and they flew off the ship and landed ashore. And she moved over to the Pacific. Because the power supply, or the engine room, was in the rear of the ship, the Sangamon class had rather a large hangar deck. Therefore, they were used for attack carriers as opposed to escort service. And as far as I'm concerned, I picked her up in late '44, or maybe early '45. It was early '45 at Bremerton, Washington, and we were in a shakedown cruise to pick up the aircraft. And I can remember that going down Puget Sound, there was a big deal because the Sangamon hit 15 knots. And we picked up the air carrier, and then my part is that we served going into Okinawa. We were an attack carrier into Okinawa. And we had gone into the islands on the southern coast, off the southern coast of Okinawa, and picked up ammunition, mostly bombs. I remember being on detail in a landing craft with a horse, operating a horse down there, hooking on to 500-pound bombs and going, taking them up. And we had an air raid, and the coxswain took off, and he and me and another fella that was down in the boat, we lost our ship for a couple of hours because he didn't want to be anywhere near large aircraft carriers, and I don't blame him. Mm-hmm. Anyway, nothing happened then, and we went back off and and did what aircraft carriers did. We was carrying a heavy bombing load in Okinawa. Now myself, I was a gunner's mate striker, and my job was to keep the quads 40 millimeters on the poop deck on the rear of the ship up to date or cleaned, and my CQ position was second loader on one of the 5 inches, the starboard 5-inch. We had quite armament then. They refitted her in Bremerton, Washington, and gave her a lot more firepower. For instance, they put the quad 40s on, and put a lot more twin 40s on the catwalks. And
this is the Sangamon you're talking about now?
This is Sangamon.
Can I go ahead and show your picture here?
Yeah, Sangamon. And
this is a picture of his ship here, and he said one of the characteristics of it is the holes
whale
down
decks.
here. What were they called?
The whale decks for
The whale decks. And he said you could see all the way through the ship with those.
And and then we went back out and served as service. And my life was from maybe I went down and slept some, but most of the time we stayed above deck and would go down to the chow hall, get a bite to eat, and then back up to the rear of the ship, because that was my station.
What was your duty?
My duty was gunner's mate, and I kept the quads. I worked on the quads back on the poop deck, and as I say, my CQ operation was second loader on the starboard 5-inch. And now the action that bothers me, or we talk about, is that on May 4th of 45, we came back into those islands. I don't know the name of the little harbor they called it, and loaded there. And we had several air attacks, but nothing took place. And then come pretty close to dark, we were late getting out of there, and we went to general quarters right away. And we had just cleared the harbor, and we took a twin-engine Nick with a 500-pound bomb. That's a twin-engine Japanese plane. And of course, all hell broke loose then. I spent my time there. We threw all the ammunition we had in the ready racks overboard. I went topside and pushed 5 or 6, I don't know how many aircraft overboard.
So you were hit by a
bunch of
kamikaze. You were hit by a
kamikaze.
kamikaze.
Hit by a kamikaze. And of course, everything was afire. I didn't do anything other than push aircrafts off. I did try to go back and unload that 5-inch, or tried to. I finally got the cartridge, which was the powder charge, out of her, which I dumb kid, I didn't know much about what I was doing. I don't know whatever happened to the first loader. He was gone long before. I just don't remember. I don't remember ever seeing the man again. And from there, we ran around and finally got the ships out, and I guess we kind of walked around there for several hours. I really have no idea how long all this took place or how long it took to get the fire out. It's just something you don't remember. And I'm not sure that we ever lost power. I think we were underway all the time. but we finally ended up, the hangar deck was completely demolished, and both elevators, which weighed a number of tons, I don't know how much, but the forward elevator was sitting up on top of the flight deck, and the rear elevator was standing up on end, cocked, kind of like a box, putting a box lid back into a box, wampajawed, I'll call it, and act like a sail, because that was a problem from then on until we got back to the States. We finally got underway, and I remember one story. I think it's very characteristic, and this was only a short time after everything was secured and word around. I was going up a ladder, and I heard this voice behind me say, "Mr. Loyd, Mr. Loyd, Mr. Loyd." And I turned around, and there was a dark man, about my age. And he said, "Don't you remember me?" I said, "No, I have no idea." "I's your daddy's caddy." And you talking about all the hugging? That was quite a show. And then we came back to Pearl, and they decided to send us on back to the States. I remember that our escort going back to the States was a tanker, and this elevator sitting up in the aft elevator was sitting there. It was like a sail when we went into the headwind, and we could make for about 3 knots, as I understand. The island was never reactivated. They steered from the rear steering, which was outboard on the port side, on the rear of the ship. They pretty much was a command post from there back to the States. And the captain of the tanker, according to the story, was very upset because he couldn't go as slow as we were, and he would have to go around us. And of course that was money out of his pocket, and he was most unhappy about that. But we got back and went through the canal, and by this time, with all the twins on all the twin 40 millimeters on the catwalks, they had to cut off the catwalks for us to go through the locks. And so that took place, and we came back to the States. And from there, they decommissioned the ship after about 3 months. We messed around there and played ball every day and drank beer after the ball game. And then they sent me to Olathe, Kansas, where I became a storekeeper for some reason. And I was mustered out into the Navy. Then life went along. I finally finished college, got a reserve commission as a second lieutenant in the Army. And guess what? Here I am back in the Army for the Korean situation. I went on there, served there, went to Olathe, Alabama. They have a monument to the Bow Eagle there, incidentally. And I believe that was the 45th Division. And from there I went over to Korea in the 1st Cavalry. And the situation was pretty much over then, and we kind of sat around on the 38 parallel or something like that. Anyway, just a pile of rocks, and didn't do anything. And I served my time and came on out and went back to civilian life and in the reserve and ended up in the Alabama State Guard. There I took over the division headquarters company, was company commander of the division headquarters company. Then come along the Berlin situation, and that unit was activated. I don't think they were ever called up, but they were activated.
What year was this, do you think?
Gosh, I don't know. I have trouble with those dates.
Oh, that's okay.
And because I was a widower with 3 small children, they mustered me out on hardship. And that was my military career.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have some questions for you.
Okay.
When you were on the escort carrier, the USS Sangamon, so when did you actually board that as your duty? I mean, when did you go into the service?
That was early 45.
Early 45. Okay.
Yeah. I was 17 years old. Now I look back on, I had very little sense. And from there, we picked up ship. This was shortly before the Okinawa invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
So you
pretty
guys,
late in the war.
so then you went over in support of the Okinawa invasion?
Yeah, we went over and we picked up the convoys somewhere outside of Pearl Harbor going into Okinawa, and we served there all the time during the, until May 4th, that is,
Mm-hmm.
supporting the invasion. Now the Sangamon class was rather a large class of ship, I think I pointed out, and she was used as an attack carrier as opposed to escort service.
Okay. When you said part of your duties on the ship was you manned the quads.
Yeah.
What size guns were those?
Those are 40 millimeters.
40 millimeter.
40s, There was 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you had single 40 millimeters, you had twin 40 meters, and you had quad 40 millimeters, which had 4, and they'd take 4 loaders,
Mm-hmm. So, can you tell me, how did those work? Like loading them, how many men did it take? How did you actually aim?
Yeah, let's see. To load them, it would take. This is pretty late in the war now. We had power control, and we had an auxiliary control that was. There was an aiming device, and I can't think of the call of that thing. But anyway, and it was operated separately from the quad. And the operator could move rapidly, and there was a gyro in there that lagged, so it would take care of his lead. And there was a fire control operator that determined the distance. He also wore the headgear for the battle phone. And at the quad there was 4 gunners, and there was 8 second loaders. And besides that, you had a man on the right and the left. I don't remember now. The man on the left took care of the vertical, I think. No, he took care of the horizontal traveling and could fire the gun. And the operator on the right, he could do the vertical. Now, they really didn't have much to do as long as we had power. Mm-hmm. If power went out, they took over. Actually, they worked as an assistant loader most of the time, because I don't ever remember us losing power during an attack, except for the last one. I don't have any idea what we lost then. But that's the way that operated. Now the 5 inches were pretty much under the landing deck, and we couldn't get very much elevation, but they were primarily for watercraft, or maybe we hoped that if we got a chance we'd get to shoot at a torpedo plane. But at this stage of the game there wasn't much problem with submarines or watercraft, so we really, during CQ, we didn't have a whole lot to do. We on the 5 inches. We just couldn't shoot them because the kamikazes was a problem then, not torpedo planes.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of range did you have with the 40 millimeters versus the 5 inchers? You know, like with the 40 millimeters, obviously were probably for more close aircraft, or were the 5-inch guns more for subs and?
Well,
and that sort of
they
thing?
were, towards the end of the war, they had proximity fuses for the 5 inches,
Mm-hmm.
and they always, as far as I know, they had the proximity fuses for the 45 millimeters. We also had Army 20 millimeters, and being a gunner's mate, I had worked on all of them to some extent. I think I was a gunner's mate striker as opposed to a gunner's mate. I'm not sure about
Mm-hmm.
that now, but yeah, that and range-wise, I really don't have any idea. I don't remember. But anyway, you could see them, you shot at them.
Yeah.
Well, that was it, particularly any of them that came down. We had several planes, I would say near misses during that Korean thing. And of course, late in the war, we had pretty much the air control. We had Hellcats then,
Mm-hmm.
and we kept 3 planes aloft all the time. It was a night carrier. I know they was always landing and taking off at night, and that place was like a small town. But I really don't know. Strangely enough, I spent all that time on an aircraft carrier, and I never saw an airplane land or take off.
Oh, really?
My life was on the poop deck, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, the rear of the ship. My workstation was back there, and my CQ station was back there. So I spent my life there, particularly in the war zone. Now, before we got there, I worked up on the catwalks on some 20s and 40s, but that was just to help those fellas out. And of course, listen, I'm a Chandler.
Mm-hmm.
My name's top of the alphabet. If it's a work detail, that's where they always started, at the top of the alphabet, never at the bottom. Or if they did, I don't ever remember that one time. And so any detail that came along, I was there. I expect I served as mess cook. The admiral was aboard our ship, and I served as an admiral. Orderly, or whatever you want to call them, I forget now. But anyway, I had to do that. Well, I remember the first time I was on the battle phone. Now, I'm a Georgia boy, and you can tell by my brogue, but it's not as bad as it used to be. On the battle phone, when it came my turn to check in, I checked in, and this voice came back and said, "Well, hello, Georgia." You remember things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite something. And when I was Admiral's orderly, the first time I went in to see him to tell him the exec was there, he turned around and said, "Well, hello, George." Anyway, that pretty much wraps it up.
Well, whenever you guys served in support of the Okinawa invasion, did you witness the invasion? Did you have any troops stationed on your ship that landed?
No. We were a carrier, and of course our aircraft did. Now we did. The southern tip of Okinawa was secured, and when we were down in this little group of islands, we would sit with binoculars in between whatever business we had to do, and watch them chase snipers down on the island. And they also kept master-at-arms up on the flight decks with submachine guns. And the rumor was that some Japanese would like to push mines up to a ship and blow up ship. And that was, but I always thought to keep us all aboard. But anyway, that was.
Whenever the kamikaze that struck your ship came in, I guess you probably didn't see it coming because you said you didn't. You weren't out. You weren't out. You know, where you could have seen it. Did they detect it by radar? I mean, do you know how they actually knew or saw it, or were there actually spotters?
There was too many airplanes. There was what happened was at that date, the Japanese wanted to land reinforcement on the coast on Okinawa, and so they had lots of planes up at that time, and that was just one of many planes. I don't know how many planes, but we were underway, and we were just outside coming out of the harbor, and of course we could not launch at that position because I don't guess we could. We didn't. So we had all our planes on board and trying to get out where we could get some launch.
What sort of, when the plane hit the ship, did you feel a large? I mean, obviously you felt the explosion, but how did the ship? Did it shudder, or was there any sort of?
I have no idea. I can't tell you. Everything was going on, and it was action. I don't know. All I know is that smoke and things, and we knew we were hit. I don't know how I knew we were hit, other than that we knew we were hit, and everything was a mass confusion.
And you said you guys you had Hellcats stationed on your ship, right?
Yeah,
as far
we
as
had
planes?
Hellcats and TBMs.
TBMs. Okay. When did you actually get back in the U.S. then? You said you went through was it the Panama Canal?
Yeah, we went through the Panama Canal, and it took, it took us about a month to 6 weeks to get back to Norfolk, Virginia. And then we was there 3 months before they decommissioned. So the war had to end right about that time, or pretty close about that time.
Going to Korea now, you said by the time you got there, most of the fighting had ceased.
Yeah.
So you kind of came in the end as kind of a occupying force, I guess, or so on.
That was right after they decided to cease fire, and everybody sat there. The Chinese was sitting on the other side, and we were sitting on the other side, looking at each other every once in a while, but nothing was going on. And that from there they moved us on back over to Japan, to the northernmost island, Owaka, I believe they're called. And I served my time there.
So how long were you?
Don't ask me dates. I don't know. I served. I served 2 years in the Army.
Okay.
And 23 months in the Navy. That much I know.
Looking back on your experiences, like in the military in general, what's the most significant impact or thing you took away from that? Is there anything that affected your life after that point, or was your experience in World War II something that affected your life?
Well, I think somewhere in World War II, I decided that I needed a better education than what I had. And actually, I went back to high school. I wasn't a good student, and I went back to high school and finished high school. Mainly because I wasn't smart enough to get into college. I couldn't get into college, and I finished high school and went on to graduate from college.
Where did you go to school?
North Georgia College.
What did you study there?
Business administration. And I don't know why. I guess I thought that was the thing to do. I really didn't. I don't have much thought about that right now. It certainly wasn't a great momentous decision. I think one time I had the idea I wanted a career in the Army. That was one reason I went ahead and took ROTC. The other reason was that it gave me a little more money. And I had a wife and kid, and any way I could get a little more money, that was that much to do. I will point out that the college did everything they could to help the veterans. We spent some time working on a Caterpillar that had a busted diesel in it that had been abandoned, and the school bought it because they had a surplus diesel engine that would fit into it, and they let us replace it at 10 cents an hour. But then we could work on it any time we had time to work on it, so that was a good deal.
Whenever you were, in the Navy, for instance, during the war, what sort of things did you do in your downtime? Like when you weren't on duty, just mostly sleeping, or what sort of things did you guys do to occupy yourselves?
We were pretty busy. Going overseas, we constantly practiced with the twins with 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters. They would pull a sock and, of course, would shoot at it, and that was our training, other than what I had in boot camp, and on firing and of course servicing the gun. I spent time at that, and the other time we were in quarters, and I guess we played cards, and of course we'd eat. Now the chow line was lined up on that well decks we were talking about, and I can remember that if it had any high water, the water would come up in that well deck, and we'd have to grab hold of the overhead, which was very close, and pull ourselves up because there'd be a couple of feet of water there all of a sudden. And it was always a big joke, those that didn't get out of the water, because they had wet legs and what have you. Now, when we got up into career, into combat, we had 12 hours on and 12 hours off. That was day and night. So, and then lots of times, if actions were pretty bad, we wouldn't take time to go back down to our quarters because that was a midship, and we pretty much slept there. Sometimes they would bring sandwiches around as opposed to even going down to the mess hall. So that was pretty busy times. Guys stayed busy around the guns, and of course the Airedales, the guys that were flying, anytime that they could fly, they were constantly putting planes up in the air and landing them. And so that was a busy time. But during that time, it was pretty hectic. I slept pretty much close to the gun, did a little eating and what have you. I don't know, I don't like the word fear, but I'm sure that had something to do with it. But that's
When you went back to school and you went to college, was that between World War II and Korea or after Korea?
No, that was between World War II and Korea.
So did you go into Korea as an officer then?
I went in Korea as an officer, as second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant. And when you got out of the military, what was your final rank that you had attained?
Captain.
Captain. Good.
Yeah.
What did you think of the enlisted men, or versus the officers? What was your impression?
Let me tell you, I've always laughed about that because I always thought I lived a whole lot better in the Navy than I ever did in the Army. Let's put it that way. I had a better place to sleep, and of course when you're stateside now, that's all different in the world. But I'm talking about the other part of life. When things were. Anyway, if I had my choice, I would. I think as far as an easy life was concerned, as far as physical well-being, a place to sleep, a place to eat, what have you, you'd be better off in the Navy. Incidentally, during the Korean War, the Korean War was an economic war. I was a executive officer for heavy motor company, and my job was to stay at battalion headquarters company and put liaison from there back to my company as to what they wanted us to do, if there was anything for us to do. But the trouble with that was that I didn't have a place to eat because my company got my rations, and being an officer, I'm supposed to pay for my meals whenever I ate in another mess hall. And I didn't have any money, but I had a driver, and he would go get food and come back, and I would eat his food, and he'd go back and get more food, so that I wouldn't have to pay for it because I had no money. Wasn't any reason for me to have any money while I was sitting up there on the rocks. So that was a funny thing, and of course that was quite a war. It was, like I say, that was a bean counter's war. Everything wanted to get paid for. I understand that the French Indo thing, what was that?
Vietnam.
Vietnam was even worse. Only fellow that you had to have so many casualties for so many rounds of ammunition, I think, or something like that. Terrible, terrible. That's one of the problems with bean counters, I guess.
Yeah. Did you were you able to keep in touch with your family back in the U.S. pretty easily, like through mail, writing letters?
We had emails, yes, and I didn't write as often as I should, but mail was pretty good. I don't recall in my situation. Of course, we would pick up mail and movies, incidentally, from other ships, and whenever when I left Bremerton, Washington, and we got to Pearl Harbor, we picked up mail, and we would get mail delivered in Okinawa. So it really wasn't any time that we got refueled or another ship. They were pretty good.
You know, looking back on I'll just focus on World War II right now, but those 4 years in American history, being from 41 to 45, were pivotal in at least the history of the U.S. in the 20th century, if not in the history of the United States as a whole. What thoughts do you have on, is there anything that you realized from World War II that really impacted the way of life in America after that? I mean, was there anything that you saw or realized by being in that war that you think impacted things?
One of the greatest things that the United States ever did was the GI Bill to send soldiers to college. Our technology, that we had a splendid growth from that time. And I believe that all of this was based on the fact that we had people educated in this country, going to college. And that's a problem today.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add or anything like that?
That's it.
Well, on behalf of a lot of other Americans, I appreciate your service to our country, and
Thank you.
and you gave us a real good interview and everything here. So I just want to thank you for your help today.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.